everyone. Welcome to our Ecole Chocolat Masters Hangout, where we'll be talking about ramping up the taste and texture in your chocolate bar. So ingredients added to chocolate bars are typically called inclusions. And simply put, inclusions are ingredients that are added to chocolate bars, barks, or mendiants, which are round-shaped chocolate bars, to give them even more flavor and texture. My name is Alicia Krupp. I'm from Ecole Chocolat, and today we welcome Julian Rose, Master Chocolatier and Director of Research and Development at Moonstruck Chocolate Company in Portland, Oregon.
Good morning.
And we also welcome Chad Furyk, Head Chocolatier at Theo Chocolate in Seattle, Washington.
Good morning.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So some of the traditional inclusions are nuts, such as hazelnuts or almonds, and fruits, such as raisins. Many chocolatiers and chocolate makers are adding inventive inclusions to their bars, such as spices and even dried flowers. The possibilities are almost endless. So now that we have a little bit of background about inclusions, let's just get to our discussion. So one of the first questions that we wanted to start with is related to terminology, and is there a distinction between an inclusion and an infusion? There's a chocolate maker called Mill Creek Cacao who's developed a proprietary method for infusing chocolate with aromas, for example, the aroma of mint, without actually adding any physical ingredients to their chocolate. However, other chocolatiers or chocolate makers might add mint oil to their chocolate to give it a mint flavor and refer to that as an infusion, whereas they might refer to adding solid ingredients like nut or fruit as inclusions. So is it simply about whether you're adding a liquid versus a solid to the chocolate? Is there a method that you're using? Is it both? So Julian, how do you think about that distinction?
Well, I think infusion, for me, infusion is clearly where you capture or extract some of the flavors, like let's say a tea, where you infuse tea leaves, but then in a situation with chocolate, we don't have the luxury of water. So a lot of components are water soluble, where chocolate is fat based, and you only can use fat soluble or infusible oils. So for me, infusion really means to capture and extract a flavor without adding an ingredient. And then inclusion for me is also clearly pieces, crumbs, added something to a bar, and it can be on top or it can be inside. But here's the problem: it's on the marketing side. Marketers just bastardize all sorts of words to make them accessible or paint a picture of something that's not. So. Personally, I've always had a problem with the marketers and twisting words around and giving denominations to something that it's not. So it's unfortunate, but that's the world of marketing, where you need to present something that is not necessarily actual. But as a professional, for me, it's clear infusion is when you steep or you add a flavor through a natural process, and then inclusion are pieces or particles.
Right. Okay, and Chad, do you think about that distinction in a similar way or a little bit different?
No, I think in a very similar way. I think a great example would be a lot of our ganache and caramels are infusions and not so much inclusions. And like Julian was saying, with bars, actual chocolate bars, it can be really hard to infuse flavors into them without having inclusions. So typically a lot of our chocolate bars have inclusions, except for a couple of the more classic flavors like the mint and the orange. But yeah, Julian was spot on with his thoughts of inclusions versus infusion.
And Julian, Moonstruck has some creative and beautiful bark bars with inclusions, such as your dark chocolate, basil, and strawberry bark bar. Could you tell us a bit about the inclusions that you currently use at Moonstruck?
Yes, so this is one of them, and I created this line of bars with specifically a plan the goal or the objective was to have a bar that is visually beautiful, um, interesting in flavors, so a pairing of flavors. It had to be also texture, and ultimately with a great chocolate. So the four key components were my anchor of how I approached the development. And then it was simply to find the correct ingredients that were not only interesting but would pair well with chocolate, have a good shelf life, and look good. So all these elements are in the back of my head, and I go out and seek ingredients. And of course, with years and years of experience, I've come across ingredients maybe 15 years ago that I still remember, and in a case where I need these ingredients, I'll just go and seek them out. And the beauty of internet, of course, now you can just punch in anything, and you'll find it somewhere in the world. Uh,
Great.
so that is an example, but we use a lot of freeze-dried fruits. So this
Right.
is something consumers want to have a very natural or clean label, as we call them.
Hmm.
So I can't use fresh strawberries because they don't keep, but I can use freeze-dried strawberries because they have the flavor and not the water, and they preserve the color, and all these things, these elements become um, an easy assembly when you start looking at it. So in the assortment of ingredients, we have from exotic nuts to flowers, dried fruits, semi-dried fruits, candied fruits, and so on. So once you have the assortment to your disposal, it then really becomes to the chef's expression and palate to present something that is hopefully accepted by consumers.
Right. So you have a lot of great variety. So which of your bars with inclusions is the most popular right now?
Well, the one you mentioned, strawberry basil,
Yeah.
is the most, I think, the most visually captivating. So the strawberry pieces are really nice, and people say strawberry chocolate. It makes sense, and then that exotic or herbal note that's brought in with the basil makes it approachable and delicious. So what's interesting in this combination of strawberry basil, I presented to Moonstruck when I first started 7 years ago,
Hmm.
and it was flat out rejected because they thought it was bizarre, and you see how quickly um, flavor profiles or diets or trends change so quickly now that here we are about 5 years after I represented the same bar, and
Right.
everyone was like, oh, it's amazing. So, uh, but I think it needs to remain approachable because consumers, although they think they're adventurous, they're not very adventurous.
Right. And so, Chad, Theo also makes some fantastic bars with innovative inclusions, like your fig, fennel, and almond bar, your coconut curry bar. Could you tell us more about the inclusions that Theo currently uses and which is the most popular for you?
Yeah, so we currently have two kind of lines. We have our fantasy line and then our classic line.
Hmm.
And in the fantasy line, we have much more interesting, more adventurous ingredients. So we do a bread and chocolate bar, which is got bread from the Essential Bread Company just down the street. We add some butter to it, toast it, put some salt in there, and it's just a brilliant flavor profile in the dark chocolate. And then on our milk chocolate, in that same line, we have two kind of fun bars. We have a coconut curry, so we developed our own curry spice blend, and then we also have a chai tea. So we get tea from Choice Tea, which is again just down the street, and we actually do an inclusion of tea by grinding it into a small particle size and mixing it with cocoa butter to allow us to actually get the inclusion into the bar. So, and then we have a just a plethora of other stuff like Julian uses. We use freeze-dried fruits, dried fruits, and I think right now our most popular bar is in our classic line. It's our salted almond bar. It seems like salt is very much trending right now in the world of chocolate.
Yeah.
Right, right. And so, Julian, you touched on this a little bit, but what is your process for recipe development when you're working with inclusions? Do you start with the chocolate and look for the inclusions that might match? Do you start with the inclusion?
It really, for me, creativity happens 24 hours a day. So I don't typically sit down and say, okay, I need to create something today.
Right.
I I'm really influenced by I'm influenced by fashion, architecture, travel, ethnicities, restaurants, and so on. And then there's of course the heavy trends that the market sets. So just to think and give you an example, acai berry. So acai berry were available 10 years ago, but were extremely marginal. And then suddenly the super fruits came about and became more popular. And then it trickles down where now the whole industry is presenting acai berry something, and then it gains a certain momentum, and then you're almost not forced, but you're inclined to use these superfoods because now they have awareness, they have somewhat of a following, they're more available, they might be better priced, and so on. Frankly, I have like really interesting ingredients from South America that I'd love to use, but it would be it would be a wasted effort to bring things that people have never tasted, never heard about, uh, might not even want to try because they have no reference point. So creativity and conceiving a bar or a recipe really starts with being being aware of what your customers want to see,
Mm-hmm.
can accept, and so there's a little bit of blended influences because if it's only about the chef creating something, um, it's often unfortunate that we might be ahead of our times, ahead of flavor trends, and then might not be commercially successful. So I think it's like I touched before. I just sometimes I find an ingredient that triggers an idea. Sometimes I create something for my own pleasure, and sometimes I create something for commercial pleasure.
Right. And how do you decide what inclusions might pair best with a specific type of chocolate?
So this is where your professional palate, I guess, and your professional approach to pairing and ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are things for me. Some flavors are opposing flavors. They don't mesh well. So if you take something that's highly acidic and highly tart, the tart and acidic might be a little too much. So you need to offset sometimes flavors, and that kind of pushes you to be creative in your flavor associations. So if you take something very acidic, for example, lemon, um, just like in a recipe, if you add a little bit, it's odd, but if you add a little bit of salt in a lemon confection, it brings out the lemon flavor, but suppresses slightly the acidity. And you don't want to. You could add a little bit of sugar, of course. But then you say, well, sugar is not very original. What can I add? So comes to mind lemon. Lemon and honey are very, very good together. So it's all of that. It's a process that is ongoing, and sometimes in dosing an ingredient, it's very hard to come up with the perfect blend on the first trial. You just keep moving on it.
And Chad, how do you approach recipe development at Theo?
We look at it in several different ways. We have our own retail store, which we like to do fun, really creative things. People from Seattle love coming down and capturing those amazing treats. For an example, in summertime, I do a basil pesto 1 ounce bar and milk chocolate. So we make the pesto in-house with fresh basil leaves, and
Mm,
it's an amazing product, and it's something that we can do on a small scale because we don't have to worry about how to figure out how to put it into a mass production. Um,
right.
so we can really play around with a lot of fun flavors. Another one that I like to do is a strawberry balsamic bar. So I take actual balsamic and dried strawberries and create this puree and mix it with chocolate, and it's just amazing. Again, it's like Julian touched on, it's really difficult to mix water with chocolate, but there's some creative things you can do to kind of cheat a little bit, kind of trick the chocolate into accepting a little bit of liquid, but you can't really do it on a large production scale. So then we have our classic line, and that is much more driven from the market. So we see what the market wants, and then we go into flavor development on just creating the best possible blend of ingredients that can achieve what the market wants, as well as achieve our highest quality in flavor and uh, sourcing of ingredients. So we really we really strive to try to create the neatest, coolest, funnest new bar out there, but also the one that the market really wants. Which is why, like, our salted almond bar is our most popular. But we are going to be launching a superfood bar, hopefully within the next quarter or so. Um, so we have a lot of fun, but we get to really balance with what we want to do and what the market wants. So.
Right. And Chad, we know that an extremely important part of Theo Chocolate's mission and identity is the use of organic, non-GMO ingredients. So what are some of the challenges in finding high-quality ingredients that meet those standards?
A lot of the challenges are the depth and background um, of the ingredients. So corn syrup, for instance, we're able to source non-GMO corn syrup out of Austria, and there isn't really a secondary supply for us. So, that's probably the biggest challenge is the secondary supplies. Cocoa itself can be very tricky in trying to source high quality cocoa. So we've started installing a new program to kind of incentivize farmers to grow higher quality, and in return we pay them more for their beans. So it's a pretty exciting program that we have started. The Congo, where we currently get the majority of our beans, has been a great example of us going down to the farms, teaching the farmers how to have better quality through better practices, and then in return we're able to give them more money for their products, and they have better lives, we have better cocoa, and the whole sourcing has just stepped up one more notch. So.
Right, that's such an amazing initiative.
It is, and then we also like to try to be as local as possible. So in our cherry almond bar, we were sourcing cherries from Washington and Oregon State, uh, but due to the weather conditions and then the rising cost of cherries, farmers realized that they could get a better price per pound if they just sold it fresh at the local farmers market. So we actually ran out of our local supply, and now I have to reach further to get our cherries.
Right. And Julian, back to you. Typically, inclusions are either added during tempering or after tempering, and so what factors determine when you might add inclusions?
So adding inclusion during temper is mostly driven by particle size. So if you have particles that can stay in suspension in the chocolate during tempering with the viscosity that is your chocolate. So if you have a chocolate that's relatively thick, you can put heavier inclusions during tempering. If you have a very liquid couverture or chocolate, the particles cannot be so big because they'll just fall to the bottom. So that's the first thing. Secondly, then there's what we call contamination of the equipment. So if it's something that's very strong, like curry, for example, if you put curry in a system and then you have pipes and more sophisticated machinery, you might end up with a curry flavor on your next batch. So that's really kind of a decision that's driven by production and your equipment. But you can have what's called a buffer tank that where the ingredients are going to be mixed in tempered chocolate just before depositing. So that resolves this issue. Um, but then if you also want to have the pieces, the particles exposed, like we often do the nuts or the fruits on top, well then it's obvious that you're going to pick the latter one, which is deposit your chocolate and then just put your inclusions on top. So it's a little bit driven by equipment and process, but
Right.
everything is doable. I think, like Chad was saying, on a smaller scale, you can allow yourself to do things for like a one store or two stores, and we do the same actually for our cafes. We do specialties that are only sold in cafes, which are more difficult or more work to pull off, but they still have interest and value in keeping the customers happy and interesting. And it serves as a little bit of a feedback you get from your customers. And some products have actually been tried out in cafes in a specific form, like with fresh fruits, and it was so well accepted. Then I can go back in the kitchen and create a version that is actually doable in production.
Right. And so, in terms of the challenges of working with inclusions, you touched on, you can't have something that has too much water in it because you might, have seizing of the chocolate. What are some of the other challenges about working with inclusions?
I would say compatibility with cocoa butter. So some products, actually a lot of nuts are doable with chocolate, but tend to show bloom prematurely. And this is the reason is the fat are not compatible. The liquid oils in nuts are lauric, and then cocoa butter is non-lauric, and they don't uh, they don't tolerate themselves too much.
Right.
They do to a point, but it causes sometimes a few issues. So not only water, but types of fats, types of sugars that could provoke crystallization, and then anything that could also smell very strong. Uh, so, for instance, mint. If you put mint in chocolate, whether it's oil or infused or particles, it just permeates and everything will be smelling mint. So, so sometimes a manufacturer will decide to not venture into a specific flavor because of the problems they can cause down the road.
Right.
But it's
And Moonstruck uses clear cellophane packaging to showcase the beautiful inclusions that you have on your bars. What are some of the challenges associated with that type of packaging?
so that's a good question because this is clearly because the approach was to present a bar that is visually captivating. So
Hmm.
people need to see it. We can't just rely on a picture because pictures are again the marketer's tool of presenting something that's not there. When you see these beautiful pictures of hot peppers and beautiful like ripe orange, it's not true. It's not a ripe orange in there. So we decided to go with a clear cellophane bag, knowing that it's not the best packaging for chocolate because of light exposure, uh, potential air, and so on. So it's not the best package, but for this specific product, it is definitely the appropriate bag or package because um, it made the difference. People want to touch it and pick it up when they see it. So that's a really a good sign and comes back to what I was saying earlier. If you're aware of how your customers behave, uh, making a bar that is I kind of call them the epicure bar. So it's people that are a little bit more adventurous and they like beautiful things and they like beautiful food and they like great flavors. And so I have to show it. It would be it'd be almost stupid not to show them. But the clear package means that I need to make smaller batches more often.
Right. And Chad, what are some of the challenges related to shelf life when you're working with fruit or vegetable inclusions?
Some of the challenges, like if you have freeze-dried fruit, the humidity living here in Seattle can be an issue. So you have to be very careful with how you store your products to ensure that uh, they aren't exposed to the elements. Uh, in talking about some of the ingredients that are not related to bars, uh, we really have a challenge of having candied fruit drying out. We have some barks in our store where we have some beautiful candied oranges, candied Meyer lemons, and just over time, exposed to the air, they will start to dry out and lose their brilliance. Um, and as far as more of the vegetable flavors are concerned, a lot of them can fade over time. So you may have a beautiful rosemary flavor in your bar, but over time it's going to turn more eucalyptus-y and kind of menthol-y. So you really have to know the science behind it, but also do your due diligence in making sure you're tasting regularly so you have the best product out there on the market.
Right. And so it seems like chocolatiers and chocolate makers are getting more and more creative in terms of the types of inclusions that they're adding. So at one time, we never would have seen spicy flavors like chili peppers added to chocolate. So Chad, do you have any ideas about what you think the next inclusion trend might be, or are there any inclusions you're considering working with?
I think the in the market that Theo's in, which is more of the natural and organic, the superfood is I think the newest trend. We started working with kale and trying to have some amazing products with kale in it. So I'm pretty sure that that's the direction that the chocolate market's going in, which is pretty exciting. It's going to be completely revolutionize the chocolate industry, I think.
Excellent. And Julian, what about at Moonstruck? Any new inclusions or trends that you see?
I think the craft, craft and small scale is going to keep growing,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's just determining what craft means, but that's a different story.
Right.
Uh, but it's I think anything consumers are reacting to the mega companies and they want to have the the micro company now. So it's like the pendulum, it goes one way and then it goes back the other way. So I think that's going to keep growing for the next 4 or 5 years. It's going to be about traceability and where did you source it and who's the name who's the name of the farmer and so on. So being in Portland, it's if you've seen the show Portlandia, it's not far from that. it's uh, it's a little bit crazy because consumers demand things that are not necessarily achievable, but we try. It's so I think ingredients that are they want new ingredients, they want small scale, they want batch size, they want a bit of traceability, and you're seeing it in all sorts of different businesses in the food industry
Mm-hmm.
where some websites you can actually trace a batch number based on the QR code or something. So that's again that crossover of marketers taking advantage of this and manipulating the market. It's making consumers want to know more, but they're also superficial. They just want to have the top line that they like to hear. The rest is somewhat unimportant to them. But it's hard. It's actually really hard these days to predict what a trend will be because it moves so quickly. Um, you know, one year is superfruit, and the next year it's out and it's protein. So who knows?
Right. Maybe you'll be bringing back another bar from 5 years ago, and like with the strawberry, and that'll be the new trend.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so this next question is for both of you. Other than your own bars, which we know are of course fabulous, are there other bars with really delicious inclusions that our audience should try? Julian, why don't you go first?
Um, well, without specific brands in mind, I tend to be very classic in my personal favors. I love candied orange and chocolate. I love raspberries and chocolate. Um, so I think so it reflects somewhat what I do. I think it's when people refer to classics, the name just says it. Classics means that even in 10 years, orange and chocolate will still be popular, and cherry and chocolate will still be popular. And then all the trendy flavors will come and go as they do. Um, so oddly enough, I'm not a big. I don't hunt out other chocolatiers flavors, or it's maybe it would be too easy. uh, but I like what I like, and I like Chad was saying, almonds and sea salt. They're great flavors. That bringing a little bit of saltiness and the crunch and the almonds. They're all like classic flavors that were based out of the pastry industry. And even in the pastry industry, things are moving fast. Flavors are moving fast, and fruit companies come up with these interesting fruit and vegetable association. But over and over, they just come and go. So it's so personally, I remain with the classics, and I'm happy with that.
You like what you like.
Yeah.
Okay, and Chad, what about you? Any favorites?
I would say for me it's very important that the couverture tastes great. Um, Almonds are almonds, and I think there's obviously the Marcona almonds of Spain, which are just amazing. But otherwise, almonds are almonds, and the couverture is super important. So I like to go with companies that I really like their chocolate, and then from there, like Julian, I go for my favorite kind of flavors, whether it's caramel bits or some sort of dried fruit. Are typically my favorites, but I really like to make sure that the chocolate's good, it's a socially responsible company, and then inclusions are not my first thought of where to go, I guess.
Right.
Still important, but
Right. Okay, well, I just want to close with a thank you to our panelists, Julian Rose from Moonstruck Chocolate Company and Chad Furyk from Theo Chocolate, for taking time out of your busy day to join us for this conversation and helping us to understand all about inclusions. And if for those of you who are watching, if you know anyone who missed the live broadcast, we'll be posting the video on our website, www.ecolechocolat.com, shortly. And thank you so much for watching, everyone.
Thank you.
thank you.